Sometimes the most ordinary people are called to do the most extraordinary things. In the heart of Manila's flooded streets, a poor mechanic named Luis Lucky Valdez heard a woman's terrified screams cutting through the storm. A red Ferrari had crashed into a pit filled with rushing water. The driver was trapped inside and drowning. Lucky didn't think twice. He grabbed his tire iron, dove into the flood, and smashed the window to pull her out. The woman he saved was Helena Cortez, a billionaire CEO. When she came to thank him the next day, she found something that would change both their lives. Lucky was rebuilding her destroyed Ferrari from scratch, turning it into something better than before. But when their story went public, Helena's company faced a crisis that threatened everything she'd built. What happens when a billionaire CEO realizes that the man who saved her life might just hold the key to saving her company? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning after the storm, Manila's financial district wore its scars like badges of honor. Broken glass sparkled in the gutters where floodwater had receded, and the acrid smell of wet concrete mixed with exhaust fumes from the early commuters who had returned to reclaim their city. But in the shadows of the gleaming towers, where success was measured in quarterly earnings and stock prices, a different kind of story was unfolding. Luis Lucky Valdez had been awake since 4 in the morning, not because he had to be, but because sleep had become a luxury he couldn't afford. At 32, he carried the weight of responsibility like a second skin 3 younger siblings who depended on him, a ramshackle auto shop that barely kept them fed, and dreams that he'd buried so deep he sometimes forgot they had ever existed. The shop itself was a testament to resourcefulness. What had once been a legitimate garage had been reduced to a corner lot covered by a patchwork of blue tarps and corrugated metal sheets. Lucky had negotiated the lease with Mrs. Santos, the elderly landlord, paying her in automotive repairs rather than cash. The arrangement worked because Lucky had a gift that could listen to an engine's whispers and understand exactly what it needed to sing again. His tools hung on pegboards made from salvaged wood, each one cleaned and maintained with the care of a surgeon preparing for operation. The tire iron that had saved Helena Cortez's life the night before rested in its usual spot, giving no hint of its heroic purpose. Lucky had cleaned it thoroughly, removing every trace of the murky floodwater that had nearly claimed a life. "Kuya Lucky!" The voice belonged to Maria, his 16-year-old sister, as she appeared in the doorway with a steaming cup of coffee and a concerned expression. "You didn't come home last night," Rosa was worried. Lucky accepted the coffee gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma that reminded him of better times. "I stayed here to watch the shop. Too much flooding to risk leaving the tools unguarded." Maria studied his face with the perceptiveness that came from years of reading his moods. She knew about the engineering scholarship he'd abandoned when their parents died in Typhoon 6 years ago. She knew about the textbooks he still kept hidden beneath his workbench, pages yellowed, but equations still sharp in his memory. What she didn't know was that every night, after she and their younger siblings, Rosa and Miguel, were asleep, Lucky would pull out those books and continue learning, teaching himself from advanced texts he'd borrowed from the university library. "There's something different about you today," Maria observed, settling onto an overturned crate that served as a chair. "You look like you're carrying someone else's hope." Lucky almost smiled. Maria had always been too smart for her own good, destined for the university education that he'd sacrificed to ensure she could have. Maybe I am, maybe we all are. 23 floors above the chaos of Manila's streets, Helena Cortez stood in her corner office, watching the city wake up through floor-to-ceiling windows. At 38, she commanded a technology empire worth $8 billion. But this morning, she felt more vulnerable than she had in years. The events of the previous night played in her mind like a movie she couldn't turn off. The sensation of drowning, the sound of breaking glass, and the strong hands that had pulled her from certain death. Her assistant, David, knocked and entered with the morning briefings. "The insurance company wants to schedule an inspection of the vehicle." he reported, his voice carefully neutral. And the board has moved tomorrow's meeting to this afternoon. They're concerned about the implications of the accident. Helena turned from the window, her reflection ghost-like in the glass. What implications? That I'm human enough to make mistakes? That you were driving in hazardous conditions? That the prototype was lost? That the shareholders might question your judgment? The prototype. Helena closed her eyes, thinking of the revolutionary AI chipset that had been in the Ferrari's trunk 3 years of development, millions in investment, and the key to maintaining their competitive edge in the autonomous vehicle market. It was now somewhere at the bottom of a construction pit, waterlogged and worthless. "Schedule a meeting with the insurance investigators," she said finally. "And David, find out everything you can about the man who saved me, Luis Valdez. I want to know who he is." David nodded and left, but Helena remained by the window, thinking about the hands that had pulled her from the water. They had been strong, calloused from honest work, but she remembered something else, the way they had moved with precision during the rescue. The calculated efficiency of someone who understood leverage and pressure points. Those weren't just the hands of a mechanic, they were the hands of someone who had been trained to solve problems under pressure. Back in the shop, Lucky was elbow deep in the engine of a jeepney when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was simple. "Thank you for saving my life. I'd like to meet you, H. Cortez." He stared at the screen for a long moment, then showed it to Maria. "What do you think?" "I think," Maria said slowly, "that sometimes the universe has a funny way of putting people exactly where they need to be." Lucky had learned about Helena Cortez from the news reports that had played endlessly in the shop's small television. Cortez Technologies had revolutionized everything from smartphone processors to electric vehicle batteries. She was Forbes' youngest female CEO in the tech sector, a woman who had built her empire on the principle that innovation should serve humanity, not just profit margins. What the news reports didn't mention was the loneliness that Helena carried like a hidden wound. Success had cost her relationships, friendships, and the simple pleasure of being seen as more than her net worth. She had climbed to the top of her industry, but the view from the summit was often isolating. That evening, as Lucky prepared to close the shop, he found himself thinking about the woman he'd pulled from the water. In those terrifying moments, she hadn't been a CEO or a billionaire, she'd been a person in desperate need of help. The same instinct that had driven him to abandon his own dreams to care for his siblings had compelled him to dive into that floodwater without hesitation. He remembered the CPR training he'd received during his brief stint as a volunteer firefighter in college, before economics had forced him to choose between his education and his family's survival. The muscle memory had returned instantly, his hands finding their rhythm on Helena's chest, breathing life back into her lungs with a desperation that surprised him. The news vans had arrived within minutes of the ambulance, drawn by the spectacle of a luxury car's destruction and the human drama of the rescue. Lucky had slipped away before the reporters could find him, but he knew it was only a matter of time before his anonymity would be shattered. As he locked up the shop and walked through the narrow streets toward home, Lucky carried with him the weight of decision. Helena Cortez wanted to meet him, to thank him properly for saving her life. But Lucky understood that gratitude from someone of her stature came with complications he wasn't sure he was ready to handle. The apartment he shared with his siblings was a modest 2-bedroom space above a bakery, where the smell of fresh bread mixed with the sounds of a neighborhood settling into evening. Rosa, 14, was helping 8-year-old Miguel with his homework at the kitchen table while Maria prepared dinner on a hot plate that had seen better days. "There's my hero," Rosa said with a grin when Lucky entered. "We saw the news. You're famous now, Kuya." Lucky ruffled Miguel's hair and sank into the one comfortable chair in the room. "Fame doesn't pay the bills, little sister." But even as he said it, Lucky couldn't shake the feeling that his encounter with Helena Cortez had set something in motion that would change all their lives. The text message on his phone represented more than gratitude. It was an invitation to step into a world he'd only glimpsed from the outside, a world where innovation and resources could transform dreams into reality. Later that night, after his siblings had gone to bed, Lucky sat at his makeshift desk and opened one of his hidden engineering textbooks. The pages fell open to a chapter on sustainable automotive design, filled with his own notes and sketches from years past. He had once dreamed of building vehicles that could withstand the increasingly severe weather patterns that threatened communities like his own. As he studied the familiar diagrams and equations, Lucky made a decision that would echo through both their lives. He would meet Helena Cortez, not as a grateful victim seeking to reward her rescuer, but as one innovator recognizing another. He would show her that true engineering solutions came not from corporate boardrooms, but from the streets where people lived, with the daily reality of climate change and economic hardship. The tire iron that had saved Helena's life gleamed softly in the dim light of the shop, a simple tool that had become the catalyst for an extraordinary transformation. Neither Lucky nor Helena could have predicted that their meeting would challenge everything they thought they knew about success, innovation, and the courage required to bet everything on an impossible dream. In the morning, two worlds would collide, and from that collision would emerge something neither had imagined, possible a partnership that would prove that the most revolutionary ideas often come from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes salvation arrives not in the form of a grand gesture, but in the quiet determination of someone willing to get their hands dirty for the sake of others. Helena arrived at Lucky's shop at precisely 9 in the morning, stepping out of a modest sedan rather than the company limousine David had suggested. She wanted this meeting to be personal, not a corporate photo opportunity. The contrast between her world and Lucky's was immediately apparent. Her tailored business suit looked almost absurd against the backdrop of the makeshift garage, with its patchwork roof and oil-stained concrete floor. Lucky was waiting for her, wiping his hands on a clean rag. Up close, in daylight, Helena could see the intelligence in his dark eyes and the careful way he carried himself, as if he were constantly calculating angles and forces. This was not the simple mechanic the media had portrayed. "Miss Cortez," Lucky said, extending a clean hand, "I'm glad you're feeling better. Please call me Helena, and I should be thanking you." She looked around the shop, taking in the organized chaos of tools and parts. "This is where you work?" "This is where I live," Lucky corrected gently. "The work just happens to be here too." Helena noticed something that made her pause here. Red fender propped against the far wall, its paint still gleaming, despite obvious water damage. "Is that?" "Part of your Ferrari," Lucky confirmed. "I hope you don't mind. I pulled it from the pit this morning." Helena stared at him. "You went back? Into that water?" "The construction crew was pumping it out anyway. I thought maybe I could salvage something for you." Lucky gestured toward a tarp-covered area in the corner of the shop. "Would you like to see?" Underneath the tarp, Helena found something that defied explanation. Lucky had laid out dozens of Ferrari components on a grid of clean towels, each piece carefully cleaned and labeled with handwritten tags. The engine block sat in the center, like the heart of a mechanical autopsy, its internals exposed, but treated with reverent care. "This is impossible," Helena whispered. "The car was completely submerged." Lucky pulled out a cracked tablet and showed her the screen. "I've been documenting everything. Water damage assessment, replacement part requirements, modification opportunities." He swiped through photos and detailed notes. "Your Ferrari had some interesting innovations, but also some vulnerabilities that I think we could address." Helena studied the tablet screen, her corporate mind trying to process what she was seeing. The documentation was thorough, technical, and demonstrated an understanding of automotive engineering that went far beyond basic mechanical repair. "Where did you learn to do this?" "University of the Philippines, before." Lucky stopped himself. "Before life got in the way. But you keep learning, you know. Every broken engine teaches you something new." Helena picked up one of the labeled Componenza water-damaged sensor array. "This is from the autonomous driving system. It cost us 6 months and $2 million to develop." "I know," Lucky said quietly. "I recognize the architecture. It's elegant work, but not very robust against environmental challenges. He showed her another component. "This is what I think we could do instead." The piece in his hand looked nothing like the original sensor. It was smaller, simpler, and appeared to be constructed from mismatched parts. But when Lucky explained its function, Helena realized she was looking at something revolutionary. "You made this from salvage?" she asked, examining the improvised sensor. "Coconut husk fibers for the weather, resistant casing, recycled smartphone components for the processing unit, and a few custom modifications to improve flood tolerance." Lucky's voice carried the quiet pride of someone who had solved a complex problem with limited resources. "It won't be as fast as your original, but it should keep working even when submerged." Helena set down the component carefully, her mind racing. The implications of what Lucky had created in a single night were staggering. Her company's research and development team had spent months trying to solve the environmental vulnerability problems that Lucky had addressed with recycled materials and indigenous innovation. "Lucky, do you realize what you've done here?" "I've tried to fix what was broken," he said simply. "Same thing I do every day." Helena pulled out her phone and checked the time. Her board meeting was scheduled for 11, but suddenly the prepared presentation about damage control and stock protection seemed irrelevant. "I need to make a call. Would you mind if I postponed our conversation for a few hours?" "Of course. I'll be here." As Helena stepped outside to call David, Lucky returned to his work with quiet satisfaction. He had spent the entire night in the flooded construction pit, diving repeatedly to retrieve Ferrari components while the crew pumped water. It had been dangerous, exhausting work, but each piece he recovered felt like a small victory against waste and excess. The cracked tablet that documented his progress was itself a symbol of his approach to innovation. He had bought it second-hand, repaired the screen with careful application of clear packing tape, and loaded it with engineering software that he had learned to use through online tutorials. Every entry in his documentation was designed not just to record his process, but to teach others how to replicate his solutions. "Any kid with grit can learn," he had written in his introduction to the Ferrari restoration project. "Tools don't make the engineer, understanding does." When Helena returned, she found Lucky reassembling the Ferrari's engine with modifications that incorporated his flood-resistant innovations. His movements were precise, economical, and demonstrated the kind of muscle memory that came from years of hands-on experience. "I cancelled my board meeting," Helena announced. Lucky looked up, a wrench still in his hand. "That seems like something important to cancel." It was. They were expecting me to discuss damage control and investor confidence. "Instead, I want to talk to you about something else entirely." Helena sat down on an overturned crate, unmindful of her expensive suit. "What you've created here isn't just impressive engineering, it's a completely different philosophy of innovation." "I'm not sure I follow." "In my world, we solve problems by throwing money and resources at them until something works. You solve problems by understanding them so deeply that you can fix them with whatever happens to be available." Helena gestured at the modified engine. "That's not just engineering. That's wisdom." Lucky set down his wrench and gave Helena his full attention. "Wisdom is expensive when you don't have any other choice." "But that's exactly my point. We do have other choices, and we keep making the wrong ones." Helena pulled up news articles on her phone, showing Lucky the headlines about climate change, economic inequality, and technological innovation that served only the wealthy. "My company develops solutions for problems that most people will never be able to afford." "You develop solutions that work for everyone." "I develop solutions that work for me and my family," Lucky corrected. "If they help other people, that's good, but it's not the goal." Helena studied his face, seeing the careful boundaries he maintained around his hope. "What if it could be the goal? What if we could scale your approach to reach the communities that need it most?" Lucky was quiet for a long moment, his hands still moving automatically to clean and organize his tools. "That sounds like the kind of dream that rich people have about poor people. Very inspiring, not very practical." Maybe. Or maybe it's the kind of dream that becomes real when the right people find each other at the right time. Helena stood up, brushing dust from her suit. I have a proposition for you, Lucky. Not charity, not gratitude. A partnership. What kind of partnership? The kind where you teach my company how to build things that actually matter. And I provide the resources to make it happen on a scale that could change lives. Helena's voice carried the conviction of someone who had built an empire on calculated risks. Starting with this Ferrari. Show me how to turn one salvaged luxury car into something that could serve an entire community. Lucky looked at the engine he had been rebuilding, then at the tablet that documented his process, and finally at Helena herself. He saw something in her expression that reminded him of his own younger siblings when they encountered a problem they were determined to solve via a mixture of frustration, hope, and stubborn refusal to accept limitation. You're serious about this? I've never been more serious about anything in my life. Lucky set down his tools and extended his hand to Helena. Then let's see if we can turn your broken Ferrari into something worth saving. As they shook hands in the shadow of the partially rebuilt engine, neither of them fully understood the magnitude of what they were beginning. The cracked tablet that documented Lucky's innovations would become the foundation for a technological revolution. The tire iron that had saved Helena's life would be joined by countless other simple tools in service of an impossible dream. But in that moment, surrounded by the organized chaos of Lucky's shop and the evidence of his quiet genius, Helena felt something she hadn't experienced in years, the electric excitement of standing at the beginning of something that could change everything. The partnership they were forming would challenge every assumption about innovation, success, and the courage required to bet everything on the belief that salvation often comes from the most unexpected places. The first indication that their partnership would face resistance came at 7 in the morning, 3 days after Helena and Lucky's handshake agreement. Lucky was adjusting the carburetor on Mrs. Santos's delivery truck when Maria burst into the shop, her face flushed with excitement and concern. "Kuya, you need to see this," she said, thrusting her phone toward him. The video playing on the screen was grainy, obviously shot from a smartphone, but the audio was clear. It showed Lucky pulling Helena from the submerged Ferrari, his movements swift and sure as he smashed through the rear window. The footage had been posted to social media with the caption, "Rich CEO crashes car in flood, poor mechanic risks life to save her." "How many views?" Lucky asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. 2 million and climbing. It's everywhere. Facebook, YouTube, TikTok. People are calling you a hero. Lucky sat down heavily on his work stool. People love stories about heroes. They're less interested in what happens after the rescue. The phone buzzed with an incoming call from Helena. Her voice was tense when Lucky answered. "Have you seen the news?" "Just saw the video. Maria showed me. It's worse than the video. The business press is having a field day. They're calling it Ferrari Gate and questioning everything from my driving skills to my judgment as a CEO. Helena's voice carried the strain of someone who had spent the night fielding calls from concerned board members. Stock price dropped 12% at opening. Lucky felt a familiar knot form in his stomach, the same sensation he'd experienced when the University Financial Aid Office had explained that his scholarship wouldn't cover both his tuition and his family's living expenses. So what does that mean for our partnership? It means we need to move faster than I originally planned. The board is calling an emergency meeting for this afternoon. I need something concrete to show them, something that proves this partnership isn't just an emotional reaction to the rescue. After ending the call, Lucky stared at the rebuilt Ferrari engine that had consumed his last 3 nights. Helena had been right about the scale of the challenge they faced. In her world, perception moved markets and board votes determined the fate of billion-dollar initiatives. His world moved at the pace of patient craftsmanship and careful resource management. "You look worried," Maria observed, settling beside him on another crate. "I am worried. Helena's company is under pressure because of the rescue. If her board decides I'm a liability, this partnership ends before it begins. Maria studied her brother's face with the insight that came from years of reading his moods. You know what I think? I think you're scared of something else entirely. What's that supposed to mean? You're scared of hoping too much. You're scared that this might actually work, and then you'd have to admit that maybe you deserve something better than just surviving day to day. Lucky was quiet for a moment, thinking about the engineering textbooks hidden beneath his workbench and the dreams he'd buried so deep he'd almost forgotten their shape. Hope is dangerous when you can't afford to be wrong. But Kuya, what if this time you can't afford not to hope? That afternoon, while Helena faced hostile questions from her board of directors, Lucky received an unexpected visitor. The man who entered his shop wore an expensive suit that somehow managed to look comfortable despite the heat and humidity. He introduced himself as Marcus Chen, senior partner at Chen, Rodriguez, Associates, Corporate Communications. Mr. Valdez, I represent certain parties who are concerned about the potential negative impact of your association with Ms. Cortez. Lucky continued working on the engine, not looking up. I'm not associated with anyone. I helped someone who was drowning. That's what decent people do. Of course, and that's admirable. But the reality is that this situation has created complications for Cortez Technologies. Stock prices have dropped, investor confidence is shaken, and there are questions about Ms. Cortez's judgment. Chen's voice was smooth, practiced. My clients would like to offer you compensation for your heroic actions, enough to ensure your financial security and allow you to avoid any further entanglement in corporate politics. Lucky finally looked up from his work. How much? $500,000. Cash. No strings attached, except that you would agree to decline any formal business relationship with Cortez Technologies. The number hung in the air between them like a physical presence. $500,000 would pay for his siblings' education, secure their apartment for years, and allow him to expand his shop into a legitimate business. It was more money than Lucky could expect to earn in a decade of patient automotive repair. That's a generous offer, Lucky said carefully. Ms. Cortez is a brilliant woman, but she's operating from emotion rather than logic right now. This partnership she's proposing, it's not sustainable. The business world doesn't reward sentiment, Mr. Valdez. It rewards results and predictable returns on investment. Lucky set down his wrench and faced Chen directly. What makes you think I'm interested in what the business world rewards? Because you're a practical man. You have responsibilities, family members who depend on you. This partnership with Ms. Cortez is a risk that could end badly for everyone involved. After Chen left, Lucky sat alone in his shop, staring at the business card the man had left behind. The offer was real. Chen had shown him documentation proving his clients had the resources to honor their commitment. $500,000 for walking away from a partnership that might not succeed anyway. His phone buzzed with a text from Helena. Board meeting pushed to tomorrow. They want to see the Ferrari prototype running before they make any decisions. Think we can manage that? Lucky looked at the engine he had been rebuilding, then at the cracked tablet that documented his innovations. The flood-resistant modifications were nearly complete, but the real test would be whether the rebuilt Ferrari could actually perform as promised. More importantly, whether it could demonstrate the viability of their partnership to skeptical investors who measured success in quarterly earnings rather than community impact. He thought about Marcus Chen's warning and the very real risks that Helena was taking by betting her reputation on an unproven partnership with a street mechanic. He thought about his siblings and the secure future that $500,000 could provide. But mostly, he thought about the moment when he had pulled Helena from the drowning Ferrari, the instant when all the calculations and considerations had fallen away, leaving only the simple human imperative to help someone in desperate need. Lucky picked up his phone and typed a response to Helena. Engine will be ready. Let's show them what's possible. Then he tore up Marcus Chen's business card and returned to his work, knowing that he had just chosen hope over security, possibility over certainty. The leaked rescue footage that had started this crisis was about to become the foundation for something much larger, a test of whether innovation born from necessity could survive in a world that often valued image over substance. As night fell over Manila, Lucky worked by the light of a single overhead bulb, making final adjustments to the engine that would either vindicate Helena's faith in their partnership or confirm her board's suspicions that she had let emotion cloud her business judgment. The stakes had never been higher, and the margin for error had never been smaller. Tomorrow would determine whether their handshake agreement could survive the collision between two very different world zones that measured success in stock prices and quarterly reports, and another that measured success in problems solved and lives improved. The tire iron that had started everything hung in its usual place, a simple tool that had become the symbol of an extraordinary gamble. Helena's boardroom occupied the entire 42nd floor of the Cortez Technologies Tower, its panoramic windows offering a commanding view of Manila Bay. At 10 in the morning, sunlight streamed through the glass, illuminating the faces of 12 board members who had gathered to determine the future of the company and Helena's leadership. The rebuilt Ferrari sat in the building's parking garage, its engine purring with the quiet confidence that came from Lucky's meticulous restoration. Helena had driven it to work that morning, feeling the subtle differences that Lucky's modifications had made: smoother acceleration, more responsive handling, and an indefinable sense of mechanical harmony that spoke to deeper innovations beneath the surface. "Ladies and gentlemen," Helena began, standing at the head of the polished conference table, "3 days ago, this company faced what appeared to be a public relations disaster. Today, I want to present it as the beginning of our greatest opportunity." Board member Jonathan Reyes, a silver-haired veteran of 3 previous CEO transitions, spoke first. "Helena, we're all relieved that you survived the accident. But the market reaction has been severe and investor confidence is shaken. We need to discuss damage control, not new initiatives." Helena activated the presentation screen, showing the first slidey photo of Lucky's shop with the rebuilt Ferrari engine visible in the background. "What if I told you that the man who saved my life has also solved our biggest technical challenges with the electric vehicle division?" "I'd say you're letting gratitude cloud your business judgment," replied Sandra Liu, the board's technology expert. "We've invested $40 million and 2 years of research into environmental resistance for our EV systems. You can't seriously suggest that a street mechanic has succeeded where our engineers have failed." Helena clicked to the next slide, showing Lucky's documentation of his flood-resistant modifications. Luis Valdez didn't fail out of engineering school. He left to support his family after his parents died in Typhoon Ondoy. His innovations aren't just functional, they're revolutionary. The room fell silent as Helena explained Lucky's approach to automotive engineering, his use of indigenous materials for weather resistance, and his philosophy of accessible innovation. She showed them test results, demonstrating that Lucky's modifications had actually improved the Ferrari's performance while making it more environmentally resilient. "This is interesting from a technical standpoint," conceded Dr. Elizabeth Morales, the board's research and development liaison. "But interesting doesn't necessarily translate to scalable business solutions." Helena clicked to her final slide: comprehensive business plan labeled Project Phoenix. "I'm proposing that we launch a new division focused on climate-adaptive vehicles for emerging markets. Instead of building luxury EVs that only wealthy consumers can afford, we'll transform damaged luxury vehicles into affordable, flood-resistant transportation for communities that need them most." The silence that followed was broken by nervous shifting and exchanged glances. Finally, Reyes spoke. "Helena, this sounds like corporate charity dressed up as business strategy. Our shareholders expect returns on investment, not social experiments. Our shareholders should expect innovation that creates new markets rather than just serving existing ones," Helena replied firmly. "The global market for climate-adaptive vehicles is projected to reach $60 billion by 2030. We can either lead that market or watch our competitors seize it while we're focused on quarterly earnings." Sandra Liu leaned forward. And you want to base this $60 billion bet on a partnership with a mechanic who learned engineering from textbooks? I want to base it on results. The Ferrari downstairs proves that Louis Valdez's methods work. More importantly, his approach to innovation could transform how we think about sustainable technology. Helena outlined her vision for Project Phoenixa program that would purchase damaged luxury vehicles from insurance companies, refurbish them using Lucky's techniques, and distribute them as affordable transportation to flood-prone communities. The pilot program would start small, but the potential for expansion was enormous. Who would manage this initiative? Asked Dr. Morales. Luis Valdez would serve as chief engineer, working with our existing R&D team to scale his innovations. The boardroom erupted in concerned murmurs. Reyes raised his hand for silence. Helena, you're asking us to bet the company's reputation on someone with no formal credentials, no corporate experience, and no track record beyond a single vehicle restoration. I'm asking you to bet on someone who understands the problems we're trying to solve because he lives with them every day. Our engineers are brilliant, but they design solutions for customers they've never met, in conditions they've never experienced. Helena thought about her conversation with Lucky the previous evening when she had visited his shop to review the final preparations for today's presentation. She had found him working late, his siblings gathered around the rebuilt Ferrari as he explained how each modification addressed specific challenges faced by Filipino drivers during monsoon season. This isn't about individual heroism or corporate charity, Helena continued. This is about recognizing that the most innovative solutions often come from the people who understand problems most intimately. Board member Carlos Mendoza, who had remained silent throughout the discussion, finally spoke. What are you asking for, specifically? Approval for a 6-month pilot program, $10 million in initial funding, authority to hire Luis Valdez as a consultant, and permission to purchase 50 damaged luxury vehicles for conversion. And if the pilot fails? Helena met his gaze steadily. Then I'll resign as CEO and recommend that the board pursue more traditional strategies. The weight of her commitment settled over the room like a physical presence. Helena Cortez had built Cortez Technologies into a global leader through calculated risks and innovative thinking, but she had never bet her own position on a single initiative. We need to discuss this privately, Reyes announced. Helena, would you mind stepping out while we deliberate? As Helena left the boardroom, she felt the familiar mixture of anxiety and excitement that accompanied every major business decision. She had learned long ago that success required the willingness to risk everything on carefully calculated gambles, but this felt different, more personal, more consequential. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lucky, engine running perfectly. Whatever happens, we gave them something real to consider. 30 minutes later, Helena was called back into the boardroom. The faces around the table were serious but not hostile, which she interpreted as a cautiously positive sign. We voted, Reyes announced. 7 in favor, 5 opposed. You have your pilot program, Helena. 6 months, $10 million, and our sincere hope that you're right about this partnership. Helena felt a surge of relief mixed with the weight of enormous responsibility. Thank you. I won't disappoint you. See that you don't, Sandra Liu added, because if this fails, it won't just be your career on the line. The entire company's credibility will be at stake. As the board members filed out, Helena remained in the conference room, looking out at the city skyline where Lucky's neighborhood was visible in the distance. She thought about the leap of faith that both of them were taking, his willingness to leave behind the security of his small shop and her willingness to bet her empire on a partnership that defied conventional business wisdom. Project Phoenix was no longer just an idea sketched on the back of an envelope. It was a funded initiative with deadlines, expectations, and the potential to either revolutionize sustainable transportation or destroy her career. The cracked tablet that documented Lucky's innovations would soon become the foundation for a corporate research and development program worth millions of dollars. Helena picked up her phone and called Lucky. we're officially partners. Project Phoenix has been approved. Are you sure about this? Lucky's voice carried the weight of someone who understood exactly what they were risking. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Are you ready to change the world? I'm ready to try. As Helena left the Cortez Technologies tower and headed toward Lucky's shop, she carried with her the knowledge that they had 6 months to prove that innovation born from necessity could compete with traditional corporate research and development. The stakes were enormous, the challenges were daunting, and the margin for error was virtually non-existent. But for the first time in years, Helena felt like she was part of something larger than quarterly earnings and shareholder expectations. She was part of a partnership that could prove that the most powerful innovations often emerge from the intersection of privilege and necessity, where resources meet authentic understanding of real-world problems. The tire iron that had saved her life had become the catalyst for a business revolution that would test everything she believed about success, innovation, and the courage required to bet everything on the belief that sometimes the most extraordinary solutions come from the most ordinary heroes. 2 months into Project Phoenix, Lucky found himself in a position he had never imagined, sitting in a climate-controlled laboratory at Cortez Technologies, wearing a company ID badge that identified him as Chief Innovation Engineer. The transformation had been gradual but profound, as Helena's corporate infrastructure absorbed his street-smart engineering philosophy and amplified it through resources he had never dreamed of accessing. The laboratory itself was a testament to what happened when unlimited funding met practical necessity. Lucky had insisted on keeping his original tools alongside the high-tech equipment, and the result was a unique workspace where tire irons hung next to precision calibration instruments and coconut husk fibers were processed using million-dollar spectrometers to understand their molecular properties. The secret isn't the materials, Lucky explained to Dr. Sarah Tan, the company's lead materials scientist, as they examined his latest prototype battery casing. It's understanding how materials behave when they're stressed beyond their design limits. Dr. Tan nodded, making notes on her tablet. Your intuitive understanding of failure modes is remarkable. You're essentially predicting material behavior without formal stress analysis. Lucky smiled. When you can't afford to replace things that break, you learn to understand why they break in the first place. The breakthrough had come 3 weeks earlier, when Lucky had combined traditional Filipino boat-building techniques with advanced polymer chemistry to create a battery enclosure that could survive complete submersion for up to 6 hours. The innovation had emerged from his childhood memories of watching his grandfather repair bankers after typhoons, using tree resin and woven fibers to create watertight seals that lasted for decades. Helena entered the laboratory carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing the satisfied expression of someone who had just received excellent news. The insurance company approved our purchase of another 20 vehicles, luxury cars that were totaled in last month's flooding. What types? Lucky asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. 3 Teslas, 2 BMWs, a Mercedes EQS, and surprisingly, a Porsche Taycan that the owner drove into a storm drain. Helena sat down on one of the lab stools, unmindful of her expensive suit. The Porsche should be interesting, different battery architecture than what we've worked with so far. Lucky had learned to appreciate Helena's enthusiasm for the technical challenges of Project Phoenix. She had surprised him by diving deep into the engineering details, asking pointed questions about material properties and manufacturing processes that demonstrated genuine understanding rather than polite interest. There's something else we need to discuss, Helena said, her tone becoming more serious. I received a call from my uncle yesterday. Lucky knew about Helena's family dynamics from their late-night conversations in the lab. Her uncle, Roberto Cortez, had founded the company 40 years earlier and still maintained significant influence despite his official retirement. More importantly, he had never been convinced that Helena had the judgment necessary to lead the company he had built. What did he want? To express his concerns about Project Phoenix. Specifically, about you. Helena's voice carried the tension of family conflicts that went deeper than business disagreements. He's heard rumors about your background, the fact that you never completed your engineering degree, that you're essentially self-taught. Lucky felt the familiar knot in his stomach that came whenever his credentials were questioned. And what did you tell him? I told him that some of the most innovative engineers in history were self-taught, and that formal credentials don't guarantee practical wisdom. Helena met his eyes directly, but I also told him that you're planning to complete your degree. I am? You are. The University of the Philippines has agreed to give you credit for your work experience and allow you to complete your degree through a combination of testing and project-based learning. Dr. Morales from our board sits on their engineering advisory committee. Lucky was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the textbooks he had hidden under his workbench and the dreams he had buried 6 years earlier. That's generous, but I'm not sure I have time for coursework with Phoenix demanding so much attention. You'd be completing your degree while working on Phoenix. Your innovations here would constitute your senior thesis project. Helena smiled. Besides, it's not just generous, it's strategic. Having formal credentials will make it harder for critics to dismiss your contributions. The conversation was interrupted by Maria, who had been working as Lucky's research assistant since Project Phoenix launched. She entered the lab carrying a folder thick with test results and wearing the excited expression that meant she had discovered something significant. "Kuya, you need to see this," she said, spreading test reports across the lab table. The battery degradation analysis came back from the third-party testing facility. Lucky studied the numbers, then looked up at Maria with surprise. "These can't be right. I had them run the tests 3 times. Our batteries aren't just surviving flood conditions, they're actually performing better after submersion than they did before." Helena leaned over Lucky's shoulder to examine the data. "How is that possible?" "I think the coconut husk fibers are creating a microenvironment that actually improves ion flow," Lucky explained, his voice carrying the excitement of an engineer who had stumbled onto something unexpected. "The natural polymers are interacting with the electrolyte in ways we didn't anticipate." Dr. Tan entered the conversation, having overheard from her adjacent workstation. "If this data is accurate, you've essentially discovered a new form of biomimetic enhancement for lithium-ion batteries. This could revolutionize energy storage across multiple industries." Lucky felt the weight of the discovery settling over him like a warm blanket. This wasn't just an improvement to their flood-resistant vehicle program, it was a fundamental breakthrough that could have applications far beyond transportation. "We need to be careful about how we announce this," Helena said, her corporate instincts engaging. "Patent applications, peer review, controlled disclosure to prevent competitors from reverse engineering our innovations." "We need to be careful about something else too," Lucky added quietly. "My family's safety." Helena looked at him with concern. "What do you mean?" "Innovations this valuable create enemies. People who profit from existing technologies don't appreciate disruption." Lucky thought about Marcus Chen's visit and the subtle pressure that had been building around his neighborhood. "My siblings still live in the old apartment. If someone wanted to send a message about Project Phoenix, they'd be easy targets." Helena's expression hardened. "We'll arrange security, corporate protection services, upgraded apartment security, whatever you need. I don't want them to live like prisoners because of my work." "Then we'll be smart about it. Subtle protection, normal life routines, but with safeguards in place." Helena pulled out her phone. "David can coordinate with our security team." As they discussed protection protocols, Lucky found himself thinking about the photograph he kept in his Walletta family picture, taken 3 months before his parents died in Typhoon Ondoy. His father had been an electrician, his mother a seamstress, both of them hard-working people who had dreamed of their children having opportunities they had never imagined. "There's something I need to tell you about my parents," Lucky said, interrupting the security planning discussion. Helena set down her phone and gave him her full attention. "They didn't just die in the typhoon. They were testing a prototype I had designed, the flood-resistant electrical system for low-income housing." Lucky's voice carried the weight of guilt he had carried for 6 years. "The system failed. They were electrocuted when floodwater breached the housing I had designed to keep them safe. The laboratory fell silent, except for the quiet hum of equipment. Maria reached over and squeezed her brother's hand, while Helena processed the magnitude of what he had shared. "That's why you left engineering school," Helena said finally, "not just because of financial pressure, but because you blamed yourself." "I did blame myself. I still do, sometimes." Lucky looked at the battery prototypes surrounding them. "But I also learned something from their deaths, that innovation without humility is dangerous, and that the people we're trying to help are the ones who pay the price when we get it wrong." Helena understood now why Lucky's approach to engineering was so methodical, so focused on testing and redundancy. His parents' deaths had taught him that elegant theories meant nothing if they failed in the real world, and that the stakes of innovation were measured not in stock prices, but in human lives. "Is that why you document everything so carefully?" she asked. "So others can learn from your mistakes." "So others can avoid my mistakes," Lucky corrected. "Every failure teaches you something, but only if you're honest about what went wrong and why." Dr. Tan had been quietly listening to the conversation, and now she spoke with the thoughtful tone of someone who had gained new insight into a colleague's motivations. "That's why your innovations are so robust. You're not just designing for optimal conditions, you're designing for the worst-case scenarios you've actually experienced." Lucky nodded. "My parents taught me that engineering isn't about being clever. It's about being responsible to the people who trust your work with their lives." As afternoon light streamed through the laboratory windows, illuminating the prototype batteries that represented months of careful innovation, Lucky felt the weight of responsibility that came with breakthrough discoveries. The biomimetic enhancement they had stumbled upon could transform multiple industries, but it also represented the kind of disruptive innovation that threatened established interests and created powerful enemies. The damaged family photograph in Lucky's wallet served as a constant reminder that innovation carried moral weight and that the true measure of their success would be determined not by corporate profits, but by the lives their work could save or improve. Project Phoenix was no longer just about flood-resistant vehicles. It had become a test of whether authentic innovation could survive in a world where disruption often came at the cost of those least able to protect themselves. The Sabotage was discovered at 6 in the morning by Maria, who had arrived early to run final diagnostics on their latest prototype before the scheduled demonstration for potential investors. She found the Phoenix 1 vehicle's hood propped open and its battery compartment exposed, with clear signs that someone had tampered with the electrical systems during the night. "Kuya, you need to see this," Maria called, her voice tight with controlled anger. Lucky arrived within minutes, still wearing yesterday's clothes after spending the night in the lab, reviewing performance data. What he saw made his stomach clench with familiar, dread-severed wiring, damaged sensors, and clear evidence that someone with technical knowledge had systematically sabotaged 3 months of careful engineering work. "Professional job," Lucky observed, examining the cut wires. "Whoever did this knew exactly which systems to target for maximum damage without making it obvious." Helena arrived shortly after, having received Maria's emergency call. She surveyed the damage with the controlled fury of someone who had built an empire by confronting challenges head-on. "Security cameras?" "Disabled between midnight and 3 a.m., Lucky replied. "Inside job, or someone with access to our security protocols." The timing couldn't have been worse. In 4 hours, they were scheduled to demonstrate the Phoenix 1 prototype to a group of international investors who had flown in specifically to evaluate the commercial potential of their flood-resistant vehicle technology. The Sabotage appeared designed not just to prevent the demonstration, but to raise questions about their security and competence. "Can we repair the damage in time?" Helena asked. Lucky was already pulling replacement components from their inventory. "Maybe, if we work fast and get lucky with the diagnostic systems." He paused, studying Helena's face. "But this isn't random vandalism. Someone wants Project Phoenix to fail, and they have resources and inside information." Maria had been quietly photographing the damage, documenting every severed wire and damaged component. This is the same pattern as the attacks on Dr. Reyes's renewable energy project last year, she observed. Remember the news reports about industrial sabotage in the green technology sector? Helena felt a chill of recognition. Dr. Alberto Reyes had been developing breakthrough solar panel technology when his laboratory was burglarized and his prototypes destroyed. The incident had been investigated as corporate espionage, but no charges were ever filed. 6 months later, a competing company had announced remarkably similar technology. "Who knew about today's demonstration?" Lucky asked, his hands already working to replace damaged wiring. "The board, the investor group, our core engineering team, and—" Helena stopped, realizing the implications. "And whoever Marcus Chen represents. The people who offered you money to walk away from our partnership." Lucky connected a replacement sensor, testing its responsiveness with practiced efficiency. Chen mentioned concerned parties who wanted to prevent complications for Cortez Technologies. Maybe they decided to create bigger complications instead. As they worked to repair the sabotage, Helena found herself thinking about the corporate warfare that existed beneath the surface of legitimate business competition. She had always known that disruptive innovations created enemies, but she had underestimated the lengths to which established interests would go to protect their market positions. "There's something else," Maria said quietly. "I've been monitoring social media discussions about Project Phoenix. Someone's been spreading rumors about Lucky's qualifications, questioning whether he's really qualified to lead a major engineering initiative." Helena looked up from the component she was installing. "What kind of rumors?" "That he's a fraud who's taking credit for other people's work. That his innovations are actually stolen from legitimate research programs." Maria's voice carried the hurt of someone watching her brother's reputation being systematically attacked. "The posts are coordinated, professional. Someone's running a deliberate disinformation campaign." Lucky continued working, but Helena could see the tension building in his shoulders. "They're trying to destroy your credibility before the demonstration," she realized. "Even if we get the vehicle working, they want the investors to see you as unreliable." "Maybe I am unreliable," Lucky said quietly. "Maybe Chen was right about the risks of this partnership." Helena stopped working and looked at him directly. "Lucky, 3 months ago you solved engineering problems that our research team had been struggling with for 2 years. Yesterday, you discovered a battery enhancement that could revolutionize energy storage. Today, you're rebuilding a sabotaged prototype in 4 hours. If that's unreliable, then I want more unreliability in my company." Maria smiled despite the tension. "Besides, Kuya, you taught me that engineering isn't about being perfect. It's about solving problems with whatever tools you have available." Lucky managed a slight smile in return. "When did you get so wise?" "I learned from the best." As they worked, Helena made a strategic decision that would escalate their conflict with whoever was behind the sabotage. She called David and instructed him to hire a private investigation firm to identify the source of the disinformation campaign and the security breach. "If someone wants to play corporate warfare," she told Lucky, "they're going to discover that I didn't build this company by backing down from fights." The repair work proceeded with the intensity of a surgical operation. Lucky's hands moved with practiced precision, guided by 3 months of intimate familiarity with every component in the Phoenix vehicle. Maria assisted with the systematic approach she had learned from watching her brother work, while Helena handled communications with the incoming investors. At 10:30, with 30 minutes before the scheduled demonstration, the Phoenix 1 prototype hummed to life. The sabotaged systems had been replaced, the damaged wiring repaired, and the vehicle's performance parameters restored to their previous levels. "It's working," Lucky announced, though his voice carried the caution of someone who understood that functional and reliable were different standards. Helena tested the vehicle's flood-resistant systems, watching as the battery compartment sealed itself against simulated water intrusion. "Better than working. It's performing at full specifications." The investor demonstration proceeded as scheduled, with 12 representatives from automotive companies, venture capital firms, and government development agencies gathering in the Cortez Technologies testing facility. Lucky presented the vehicle's innovations with quiet confidence, explaining how traditional materials had been enhanced through indigenous techniques to create unprecedented environmental resilience. The highlight of the demonstration came when the Phoenix 1 prototype was driven through a controlled flood simulation, 3 feet of water that would disable most conventional vehicles. The Phoenix prototype not only continued operating, but actually showed improved battery performance, validating Lucky's biomimetic enhancement discovery. "Remarkable," observed Dr. Yuki Tanaka from the Japanese Ministry of Transportation. "How long did it take to develop these innovations?" The core concepts emerged from traditional Filipino engineering techniques that are centuries old. Lucky replied, "We've simply applied modern materials science to understand why those techniques work so well." After the demonstration, as investors discussed licensing agreements and manufacturing partnerships, Helena found Lucky standing alone in the laboratory, staring at the family photograph he kept on his workstation. "Successful demonstration," she observed. "Yes, but that's not the end of it. Whoever sabotaged us today won't give up because we fixed their damage." Lucky's voice carried the weight of someone who understood that success often created more dangerous enemies than failure. "They'll escalate." Helena sat down beside him. "Then we'll escalate too. I've hired investigators to trace the source of the attacks. We're going to find out who's behind this and expose them." "What if exposure isn't enough? What if they decide my family is a liability that needs to be eliminated?" Helena studied Lucky's face, seeing the fear that he rarely allowed himself to express. "Then we'll make sure your family is protected. Whatever resources that requires, whatever precautions we need to take." Lucky was quiet for a moment, then pulled out his phone and showed Helena a text message he had received during the demonstration. "Nice presentation. Shame if something happened to your sibling's school." The threat was clear, professional, and designed to exploit Lucky's deepest vulnerability, his protective instincts toward his family. Helena felt a surge of protective anger that surprised her with its intensity. "We're moving your family tonight," she decided. "Company safe house, corporate security, whatever it takes to keep them safe while we deal with this." "That's exactly what they want to isolate me, make me dependent on your protection, undermine my ability to work independently." Helena realized that Lucky was right. The sabotage and threats weren't just attempts to destroy Project Phoenix. They were psychological warfare designed to make Lucky question his capabilities and Helena question her judgment. "So what do we do?" Lucky looked at the repaired prototype vehicle, then at the photograph of his parents, then finally at Helena. "We do what engineers do when systems fail. We analyze the problem, identify the weakest points, and design a solution that's stronger than the forces trying to break it." "And how do we do that?" "By making Project Phoenix too successful to sabotage, too valuable to destroy, and too visible to attack without massive consequences." Lucky's voice carried the quiet determination of someone who had decided to fight rather than retreat. "Tomorrow, we start deploying Phoenix vehicles to flood-prone communities. Real deployments, real families, real problems solved in real time." Helena understood the strategy immediately. By making Project Phoenix visible and valuable to actual communities, they would create a constituency that would defend the program against corporate sabotage. The vehicles would no longer be just prototypes in a laboratory. They would be essential infrastructure protecting real families from real dangers. "That's brilliant," she said, "and incredibly risky." "All innovation is risky. The question is whether we're risking things that matter for results that matter more." As they prepared to leave the laboratory, Helena felt the weight of the decision they had made. Tomorrow, Project Phoenix would transition from corporate research project to community service program, from controlled testing environment to real-world implementation. The stakes would increase dramatically, but so would their ability to demonstrate that innovation born from necessity could survive even the most determined opposition. The sabotaged prototype that had nearly derailed their demonstration had become the catalyst for a decision that would determine whether Project Phoenix could evolve from promising experiment to sustainable solution. The tire iron that had started their partnership was about to be joined by an entire fleet of tools designed to serve communities that corporate innovation traditionally ignored. The discovery that would change everything came not from Helena's private investigators or Lucky's technical analysis, but from an unexpected source, Miguel, Lucky's 8-year-old brother, who had been helping Maria organize Lucky's old college papers for his degree completion application. Kuya. Miguel called from the apartment's small living room, where he sat surrounded by yellowed notebooks and academic transcripts. "Why is there a picture of the bad man in your school papers?" Lucky looked up from the laptop, where he had been reviewing deployment schedules for the first Phoenix vehicles. "What bad man?" Miguel held up a university yearbook photo showing a group of engineering students standing around a prototype vehicle. Lucky's stomach dropped as he recognized his younger self in the front row, and more disturbingly, Marcus Chen in the back row, wearing the same confident smile he had displayed during his visit to the shop. "That's not possible," Lucky murmured, taking the yearbook from Miguel and studying the photo more carefully. The caption read, "University of the Philippines Engineering Team, Climate Adaptation Project, 2018. Maria leaned over to examine the photo. "Kuya, isn't that the man who offered you money to leave Project Phoenix?" Lucky felt the pieces of a puzzle clicking into place with sickening clarity. Marcus Chen hadn't been representing anonymous corporate interest. She had been involved in Lucky's original engineering work, the same work that had led to his parents' deaths and his departure from university. Helena arrived at the apartment 20 minutes later, having rushed over after Lucky's urgent phone call. She found him sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the yearbook photo with an expression of stunned recognition. "Marcus Chen was my engineering partner," Lucky explained without preamble. "We worked together on climate, adaptive vehicle design for our senior thesis project. He was there when I developed the flood-resistant electrical systems that killed my parents." Helena sat down across from him, processing the implications. "So when he offered you money to walk away from Project Phoenix, he wasn't representing outside interests. He was protecting himself." Lucky's voice carried the weight of 6 years of suppressed memory. "Marcus helped develop the original concepts that I've been refining for Phoenix. If our innovations become public, people might trace them back to our university research." Maria had been listening intently, and now she spoke with the sharp insight that often surprised adults. "But Kuya, if he helped create the original ideas, why doesn't he want credit for them?" Lucky was quiet for a moment, remembering details from his university days that he had tried to forget. "Because Marcus wasn't just my engineering partner. He was also dating someone else in our program, someone whose father owned a major automotive company." "Who?" Helena asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Sandra Liu, your board member. Marcus was engaged to Sandra Liu when we were developing the climate adaptation project." Lucky looked at Helena directly. "That's how our innovations have been sabotaged so effectively. Sandra has inside access to all our technical specifications and development timelines." Helena felt the betrayal hit her like a physical blow. Sandra Liu had been one of her most trusted board members, someone she had relied on for technical guidance and strategic advice. More importantly, Sandra had been present for every discussion about Project Phoenix, every presentation about Lucky's innovations, and every board meeting where security protocols were discussed. "We need proof," Helena said finally. "Accusations against a board member require evidence that can stand up to legal scrutiny." Lucky opened his laptop and pulled up files that he had been gathering for his degree completion application. "I kept everything from our university project research notes, design specifications, even email correspondence with Marcus about the original prototypes." As Lucky scrolled through the files, Helena saw documents that revealed the true scope of what had been stolen. Marcus and Sandra hadn't just been aware of Lucky's innovations, they had been actively involved in their development. More damaging, The university research had been funded by a grant from Liu Automotive Industries, Sandra's family company. This is corporate theft on a massive scale, Helena realized. They've been using your innovations for 6 years, probably licensing the technology to other companies while making sure you couldn't profit from your own work. Lucky pulled up a particularly damning email exchange from 2018 showing Marcus and Sandra discussing how to protect the intellectual property after Lucky's departure from the university program. The correspondence made clear that they had deliberately isolated Lucky's contributions and claimed credit for his innovations. "There's more," Lucky said grimly. He opened another folder containing surveillance photos that his private investigator had taken. "Marcus has been visiting Sandra's apartment twice a week since Project Phoenix launched. They're coordinating the attacks against us." Helena stared at the surveillance photos, seeing her trusted board member conspiring with the man who had tried to bribe Lucky into abandoning their partnership. The betrayal was comprehensive, personal, and designed to destroy both Project Phoenix and Lucky's reputation as an innovator. "Why now?" Helena asked. "Why escalate the sabotage instead of just claiming credit for your innovations?" Lucky thought about the question, remembering Marcus's behavior during their university days. "Because Project Phoenix isn't just using my innovation sites, improving them, scaling them, and making them accessible to communities that Marcus and Sandra never intended to serve. They want the technology to remain exclusive, profitable, and controlled by established automotive companies." Maria had been quietly reading through Lucky's university notes, and now she held up a document that made them all freeze. "Kuya, look at this research proposal. It's dated 3 months before your parents died." The document was a detailed plan for testing flood-resistant electrical systems using volunteer families from Lucky's neighborhood. The proposal had been approved by the university's ethics committee and funded by Liu Automotive Industries, but it contained a crucial safety modification that had never been implemented. "The safety protocols," Lucky whispered, reading his own younger handwriting. "Marcus convinced me to skip the redundant grounding systems because they were expensive and slowed down the testing timeline." Helena understood immediately. "He pressured you to implement unsafe testing protocols that led to your parents' deaths. And then he used my guilt and departure from university to claim full ownership of the technology." Lucky's voice carried 6 years of suppressed anger. "Marcus Chen didn't just steal my innovation, she engineered the circumstances that forced me to abandon them." The room fell silent as the full scope of Marcus and Sandra's manipulation became clear. They had orchestrated Lucky's parents' deaths through negligent safety protocols, used his subsequent departure to claim his innovations, and then spent 6 years profiting from technology that had cost him everything he cared about. "We're going to destroy them," Helena said with quiet fury. "Not just expose them, destroy them completely." Lucky looked at his siblings, thinking about the family he had rebuilt after losing his parents, and the community he was trying to serve through Project Phoenix. "No. We're going to do something better than destroying them." "What's that?" "We're going to prove that innovations developed for communities rather than corporations create better solutions and serve more people." Lucky closed the laptop and looked at Helena with renewed determination. "Tomorrow's deployment isn't just about testing our vehicle sits, about demonstrating that technology developed through authentic partnership creates value that corporate theft can never replicate." Helena understood Lucky's strategy immediately. Rather than engaging in corporate warfare with Marcus and Sandra, they would prove that their approach to innovation was fundamentally superior. The community deployment of Phoenix vehicles would demonstrate real-world value that couldn't be duplicated by stolen technology. "The families who receive Phoenix vehicles will become advocates for our approach," Helena realized. "Marcus and Sandra can steal our technical specifications, but they can't steal the relationships and community knowledge that make our innovations effective." Lucky nodded. "And once the community deployment proves successful, we'll have the evidence and support we need to expose their theft and hold them accountable for my parents' deaths." As Helena prepared to leave the apartment, she felt the weight of the choice they were making. Tomorrow's deployment would determine not just the future of Project Phoenix, but whether justice could be achieved through innovation rather than litigation, through community service rather than corporate warfare. The engineering thesis hidden in Lucky's old papers represented more than stolen intellectual property. It was evidence of a pattern of exploitation that had cost lives and prevented life-saving innovations from reaching the place, communities that needed them most. The tire iron that had saved Helena's life had become the foundation for a partnership that would prove whether authentic innovation could triumph over corporate manipulation and whether justice could be achieved through creation rather than destruction. The morning of the Phoenix deployment dawned grey and humid, with weather forecasters predicting the arrival of Typhoon Paolo within 72 hours. The timing was either perfect or catastrophic. Depending on perspective, their flood-resistant vehicles would face their ultimate test under actual typhoon conditions, but the stakes for failure had never been higher. Lucky stood on the dock at Manila Bay, watching as 12 Phoenix vehicles were loaded onto traditional Filipino bankers for transport to flood-prone communities throughout the metro area. Each vehicle represented months of engineering refinement, incorporating lessons learned from his parents' deaths and innovations developed through his partnership with Helena. "The boats are beautiful," Helena observed, joining Lucky at the water's edge. She had been coordinating with local officials to ensure proper documentation of the deployment, knowing that every aspect of the program would be scrutinized by skeptics and competitors. "My grandfather built bankers like these," Lucky replied, studying the graceful lines of the traditional vessels. "He taught me that the best engineering solutions come from understanding how natural forces work rather than fighting against them." The deployment strategy had been inspired by that philosophy. Rather than distributing vehicles through corporate dealerships or government bureaucracy, they were delivering Phoenix vehicles directly to families who had been selected by their own communities as those most in need of reliable transportation during flood emergencies. Maria approached with a tablet containing the final pre-deployment checklist. "All vehicles have passed their flood. Resistance tests, battery systems are at full capacity, and emergency communication equipment is functioning." She paused, studying her brother's face. "Are you nervous?" "I'm terrified," Lucky admitted, "but not about the vehicles failing. I'm terrified about what happens if they succeed." Helena understood his fear. Success would validate their approach to community-based innovation, but it would also escalate their conflict with Marcus Chen and Sandra Liu to a level where corporate sabotage might give way to more direct threats. The previous night, Lucky's family had moved to a secure location after receiving another anonymous message: "Cancel the deployment or face consequences." "The families receiving vehicles understand the risks," Helena reminded him. "They volunteered to participate because they believe in what we're trying to accomplish." Lucky watched as Mrs. Rodriguez, a widow from Tondo who supported 3 grandchildren, carefully examined her assigned Phoenix vehicle with the attention of someone whose life might depend on its reliability. She had lost her home in the previous year's flooding and needed dependable transportation to reach her job at a textile factory during monsoon season. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Lucky called, approaching the elderly woman, "how does everything feel?" "Like hope," she replied simply, running her weathered hands over the vehicle's coconut husk battery casing. "My grandchildren won't have to worry about me getting trapped in floodwater anymore." Similar conversations were taking place throughout the dock area as families received their Phoenix vehicles and learned about their flood-resistant features. Each recipient had been chosen not just for their need, but for their willingness to provide feedback and help refine the technology based on real-world usage. Helena's phone buzzed with an incoming call from Dr. Morales, the board member who had supported Project Phoenix from its inception. "Helena, we have a problem. Sandra Liu has called an emergency board meeting for this afternoon." "On what grounds?" "She's claiming that Lucky's deployment plan violates safety protocols and puts Cortez Technologies at legal risk if any of the vehicles fail during the typhoon." Dr. Morales's voice carried the tension of corporate politics escalating beyond normal bounds. She's also raised questions about Lucky's credentials and suggested that the deployment should be postponed until independent safety testing can be completed. Helena felt her protective instincts engage. Independent testing by whom? By automotive engineers from Liu Industries, Sandra's family company. The manipulation was obvious. Sandra was using her board position to delay the deployment until her family company could steal additional technical specifications and potentially sabotage the vehicles during the independent testing process. The deployment proceeds as scheduled, Helena decided. If Sandra wants an emergency board meeting, she can explain to the other members why she's trying to prevent life-saving technology from reaching families who need it. After ending the call, Helena found Lucky supervising the final vehicle loadings. She explained Sandra's latest attempt at sabotage, watching his expression harden with determined anger. "She's not going to stop until we stop her," Lucky observed. "This isn't just about stealing technology anymore. It's about preventing communities like mine from having access to innovations that could save lives." Helena thought about the corporate warfare that had consumed her attention for the past several months, and the realization that their conflict with Marcus and Sandra represented something larger than personal betrayal or business competition. It was a fundamental disagreement about who should benefit from technological innovation and whether communities or corporations should control life-saving technologies. The deployment gives us leverage, Helena realized. Once the vehicles are in the field helping real families, Sandra will have to explain to the board why she wants to recall technology that's saving lives. Lucky nodded, but his expression remained troubled. What if the Typhoon damages the vehicles? What if our innovations fail when people are depending on them? Then we learn from the failures and improve the technology, Helena replied. But Lucky, your innovations have been tested extensively. The vehicles are ready. As the bankers departed for their various destinations, Lucky and Helena returned to the Cortez Technologies building to prepare for Sandra's emergency board meeting. The conference room felt different, now less like a space for collaborative decision-making and more like a battlefield where the future of Project Phoenix would be determined. Sandra Liu arrived with Marcus Chen, introducing him as an independent engineering consultant who could provide objective analysis of Project Phoenix's safety protocols. The presence of Lucky's former university partner at a corporate board meeting felt like a deliberate provocation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Sandra began, "I've called this meeting because Mr. Valdez's deployment plan puts our company at unacceptable legal and financial risk." Helena responded immediately. "The deployment plan has been reviewed by our legal department, our insurance providers, and the families receiving vehicles. Everyone involved understands and accepts the risks." Marcus Chen spoke for the first time, his voice carrying the practiced authority of someone accustomed to corporate presentations. "Miss Cortez, Mr. Valdez's innovations are based on incomplete engineering analysis and insufficient safety testing. The vehicles being deployed today could fail catastrophically during typhoon conditions." Lucky had been sitting quietly, but now he stood and faced Marcus directly. "The innovations being deployed today are based on 6 years of refinement, following the safety failures that you helped create at the University of the Philippines." The room fell silent as board members processed the implication of Lucky's statement. Sandra's face went pale, while Marcus maintained his professional composure despite the obvious shock of having his identity and involvement exposed. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Marcus said carefully. "I'm here simply to provide technical expertise. You're here to steal additional specifications and sabotage vehicles that could save lives." Lucky interrupted. "Just like you sabotaged the safety protocols that killed my parents and forced me to abandon my education." Helena produced copies of the university documents they had discovered, distributing them to board members while explaining the full scope of Marcus and Sandra's theft and manipulation. The evidence was comprehensive, damning, and impossible to dismiss. "This is a serious accusation," Dr. Morales observed, studying the documents. If these allegations are accurate, we're dealing with corporate espionage, intellectual property theft, and potentially criminal negligence. Sandra attempted to regain control of the meeting. These are desperate allegations from someone whose credibility has already been questioned. The real issue is whether we're going to allow unproven technology to be deployed during a typhoon. Helena stood and activated the conference room's display screen, showing real-time tracking data from the Phoenix vehicles that had been deployed throughout the morning. The vehicles aren't unproven. They're currently operating in flood conditions throughout Metro Manila, and every system is functioning exactly as designed. The tracking display showed 12 Phoenix vehicles successfully navigating flooded streets that had disabled conventional transportation. Mrs. Rodriguez was using her vehicle to evacuate neighbors from a flooding apartment complex, while other recipients were providing emergency transportation for medical emergencies and supply distribution. This is what success looks like, Helena continued. Not quarterly earnings or stock prices, but real families using reliable technology to solve real problems. Lucky added his voice to Helena's presentation. Marcus and Sandra want to prevent communities from accessing innovations that could save lives during typhoons. They want to keep life-saving technology exclusive to wealthy consumers who can afford luxury vehicles. As the board meeting continued, reports began arriving from the field deployment sites. Every Phoenix vehicle was performing beyond specifications, with the biomimetic battery enhancements actually improving performance under flood conditions. More importantly, the vehicles were being used for community service evacuations, medical emergencies, and supply distribution rather than personal transportation. The deployment is proving everything we believed about community-based innovation, Helena concluded. When technology is developed in partnership with the people who need it most, it creates solutions that serve everyone better. Sandra made one final attempt to derail the program. Even if the vehicles are functioning now, we don't know how they'll perform when Typhoon Paolo arrives. We should recall them before conditions become truly dangerous. Lucky looked around the conference room, seeing board members who were beginning to understand the real stakes of their decision. The families using these vehicles live with typhoon danger every season. They don't have the option of waiting for perfect safety conditions. They need technology that works when their lives depend on it. Dr. Morales called for a board vote on whether to continue or recall the Phoenix deployment. The vote was 9 in favor of continuation, with only Sandra and 2 allies voting for recall. Marcus Chen was escorted from the building by security, while Sandra faced immediate suspension pending investigation of the theft allegations. As evening approached and Typhoon Paolo moved closer to landfall, Lucky and Helena monitored the Phoenix vehicles from the Emergency Operations Center they had established at Cortez Technologies. The deployment had become more than a test of engineering innovation. It had become a demonstration of whether authentic community partnership could triumph over corporate manipulation. The traditional banker boat that had inspired Lucky's final design breakthrough was anchored in Manila Bay, riding out the increasing swells with the same graceful resilience that characterized the Phoenix vehicles now serving communities throughout the metro area. Tomorrow would bring the ultimate test of everything they had built together, and the stakes had never been more personal or more profound. Typhoon Paolo made landfall at 3 in the morning with winds that shattered windows 40 stories above the flooding streets. Lucky stood in the Emergency Operations Center at Cortez Technologies, watching real-time data streams from 12 Phoenix vehicles scattered across Metro Manila's most flood-prone neighborhoods. Vehicle 7 is moving into deeper water, Maria reported from her monitoring station. Mrs. Rodriguez is evacuating families from the Tondo housing complex. Lucky pulled up the vehicle's environmental sensors, seeing water levels that would have disabled any conventional car. Battery performance? Actually improving. The submersion is triggering the biomimetic enhancement effect. Maria's voice carried amazement despite the crisis atmosphere. She's operating in 4 feet of water and gaining power efficiency. Helena coordinated with emergency services from her position at the central command station, her voice calm, despite the magnitude of the storm raging outside. Vehicle 3 is reporting medical emergency transport in Marikina. Pregnant woman in labor needs evacuation to higher ground. The deployment map showed Phoenix vehicles functioning as mobile emergency response units throughout the flooding city. Each vehicle had become a lifeline for families who would otherwise be trapped by rising water, and Lucky felt the weight of their trust with every status update. "This is what we built it for," Lucky murmured, watching Mrs. Rodriguez's vehicle navigate through flood conditions that had shut down the city's entire conventional transportation system. A new alert appeared on Lucky's screen. Vehicle 9 had stopped transmitting data. The last known position showed it in one of the most flood-prone areas of Quezon City, operated by the Mendoza family with 3 young children. "Lost contact with Vehicle 9, Lucky announced. "Either communication failure or catastrophic system failure," Helena finished grimly. "How quickly can we get a rescue team to their location?" Lucky studied the storm tracking data and flood projections. "Not quickly enough. The area is completely cut off by floodwater." Maria pulled up the emergency protocols they had established for exactly this scenario. "Vehicle 11 is closest. The Santos family could potentially reach the Mendoza location." Lucky made the decision that would define his entire approach to engineering ethics. Contact the Santos family. Explain the situation and ask if they're willing to attempt a rescue using their Phoenix vehicle. Helena looked at him with concern. "Lucky, you're asking them to risk their lives for strangers." "I'm asking them to do what people in communities like mine do every day: help each other survive." Lucky's voice carried the quiet conviction of someone who understood that true innovation served human bonds rather than corporate liability calculations. The next 20 minutes felt like hours as they waited for the Santos family's response. When it came, it was immediate and unequivocal. "We're going. Send us the coordinates." Lucky watched Vehicle 11's progress on the tracking display as it moved through flood conditions toward the last known position of the missing Mendoza family. The Santos vehicle was functioning perfectly, its flood-resistant systems enabling navigation through water levels that had paralyzed the entire metropolitan area. "Contact established with Vehicle 9, Maria announced suddenly. They were sheltering in place during the worst of the storm surge, all family members safe, vehicle operational. Relief flooded through the operations center, but Lucky remained focused on the rescue operation still in progress. Vehicle 11 had reached the Mendoza location and was coordinating evacuation of multiple families from a flooding apartment complex. Helena's phone rang with an emergency call from the mayor's office. After a brief conversation, she turned to Lucky with an expression of stunned amazement. "The city wants to designate Phoenix vehicles as official emergency response assets. They're requesting immediate deployment of additional units." "We don't have additional units," Lucky replied. "These 12 vehicles represent our entire prototype fleet. Then we need to scale production immediately. The mayor is prepared to place an order for 500 vehicles for the Metropolitan Emergency Response System." Lucky felt the magnitude of their success settling over him like a warm blanket. Phoenix vehicles hadn't just survived their first Typhoon test. They had proven essential for emergency response in conditions that disabled all conventional transportation. "Mrs. Rodriguez just reported successful evacuation of 18 people from the Tondo complex," Maria announced. "She's requesting coordinates for additional families who need assistance." Helena watched the deployment map, seeing Phoenix vehicles functioning as mobile rescue platforms throughout the flooded city. "Lucky, your vehicles aren't just working, they're saving lives on a scale we never anticipated." The true measure of their success became clear as reports arrived from all 12 deployment sites. Phoenix vehicles were operating not just as transportation, but as mobile emergency response units, evacuation platforms, and community coordination centers. The families who had received vehicles were using them to serve their entire neighborhoods. "This is bigger than we planned," Lucky realized. "We designed these vehicles for individual families, but they're functioning as community infrastructure." The viral moment that would change everything happened at dawn, when Mrs. Rodriguez pulled her Phoenix vehicle onto dry ground after 12 hours of continuous rescue operations. A local news crew, stranded by the flooding, captured her stepping out of the vehicle with exhausted satisfaction, surrounded by 19 people she had evacuated during the night. "This car saved my whole neighborhood," she told the reporter, patting the vehicle's coconut husk battery casing with affectionate pride. "It's not fancy, but it works when nothing else does." Within hours, the footage was trending across social media platforms worldwide. Phoenix vehicles began spreading as citizens shared videos of the flood-resistant cars operating in conditions that had disabled emergency services. The narrative was perfect thumble innovation, serving communities that corporate technology had ignored. Lucky watched the social media explosion from the operations center, feeling overwhelmed by the scale of attention their project was receiving. "This is going to change everything," he said to Helena. "It already has," she replied, showing him her phone. "I've received calls from automotive companies in 12 countries wanting to license our technology. The European Union is interested in ordering vehicles for climate-adaptive emergency response." Maria looked up from her monitoring station with excitement. "Kuya, someone posted a video of you explaining the engineering principles to Mrs. Rodriguez. It has 2 million views and people are calling you the People's Engineer." Lucky cringed at the title, but Helena smiled. "You've become the face of community-based innovation. People see you as proof that brilliant engineering can come from anywhere." The celebration was interrupted by an urgent call from Dr. Morales. "Helena, you need to return to the building immediately. Sandra Liu has obtained an injunction to halt all Phoenix operations, claiming patent infringement." Helena felt her protective anger surge. "On what grounds?" "She's claiming that Lucky's innovations violate patents held by Liu Industries for flood-resistant vehicle technology. She has court documents alleging that Project Phoenix constitutes theft of proprietary automotive engineering." Lucky felt the familiar knot in his stomach that came with legal threats he couldn't afford to fight. "She's using stolen technology to claim ownership of my innovations." "Can she do that?" Maria asked, her voice tight with concern. Helena was already gathering her things to return to the office. "She can try, but we have documentation proving that Lucky developed these innovations years before Sandra's patents were filed. The question is whether we can get a hearing before the injunction shuts down our operations." As they prepared to leave the operations center, Lucky took one last look at the deployment map, showing 12 Phoenix vehicles continuing to serve communities throughout the flooded city. Mrs. Rodriguez was still operating evacuation runs, the Santos family was coordinating relief supply distribution, and the Mendoza family was providing emergency medical transport. "Whatever happens in court, we've already proven that our approach works," Lucky said. "These families have vehicles that saved lives during a major typhoon. Sandra can't steal that." The ride to Cortez Technologies took them through streets still covered with receding floodwater, past neighborhoods where Phoenix vehicles were visible among the few functioning transportation options. Citizens recognized Helena's car and waved, shouting thanks for the vehicles that had kept their communities connected during the storm. At the Cortez building, they found a crowd of reporters and protesters who had gathered after news of the injunction broke. Signs reading, "Support community innovation" and "Technology for people, not profit," filled the plaza, while news crews interviewed families who had benefited from Phoenix vehicles. "The people are on our side," Helena observed, though she knew that public support didn't guarantee legal victory. Inside the building, Lucky faced a choice that would determine the future of everything they had built. Sandra's legal team was offering a settlement. Lucky could retain credit for his innovations and receive compensation, but all Phoenix technology would be transferred to Liu Industries for proper development and commercialization. "They're offering $10 million, Helena explained after reviewing the settlement documents. "Full patent credit, public acknowledgement of your contributions, and ongoing royalty payments." Lucky studied the settlement terms, thinking about the financial security it would provide for his siblings and the recognition it would give to his engineering work. $10 million would solve every material problem his family faced and provide resources for the kind of formal education he had always wanted. What would happen to the families who already have Phoenix vehicles? He asked. The existing vehicles would be recalled for safety upgrades and proper certification, Helena replied carefully. Liu Industries would then remarket the technology as premium emergency response vehicles for government and corporate clients. Lucky understood immediately. Sandra's settlement would remove Phoenix vehicles from the communities that needed them most and transform them into expensive emergency equipment for wealthy buyers. Mrs. Rodriguez and the other families would lose access to technology that had saved their lives. That's not acceptable, Lucky decided. This technology was developed for communities, and it should remain accessible to communities. Helena felt a surge of pride at Lucky's response, but also concern about the legal battle they would face. Fighting the injunction will be expensive, time-consuming, and uncertain. Sandra has resources and legal connections that we don't. But we have something she doesn't, Lucky replied, looking out the window at the protesters and reporters gathered in support of Project Phoenix. We have proof that our approach creates better solutions for real problems. The legal hearing began that afternoon in a courtroom packed with Phoenix vehicle recipients, Cortez Technologies, employees, and reporters covering the case. Sandra's attorneys presented a technical argument about patent law and intellectual property protection, while Lucky and Helena's legal team focused on the community impact and public benefit of Phoenix vehicles. The turning point came when Mrs. Rodriguez was called to testify about her experience with the Phoenix vehicle during Typhoon Paulo. Her simple, direct account of using the vehicle to save 19 lives created a courtroom moment that transcended legal technicalities. This car didn't just work when I needed it, she told the judge. It worked better than anything I've ever seen, and it was built by someone who understands what people like me face every day. Lucky was called to testify about the development of Phoenix technology, explaining how his innovations had emerged from years of community-based engineering and refinement following his parents' deaths. His technical expertise was evident, but more importantly, his commitment to accessible innovation was undeniable. Sandra's legal strategy collapsed when Lucky's university documents were presented as evidence. The timeline clearly showed that his innovations predated Sandra's patents by several years, and that her company had built their intellectual property claims on stolen research. The judge's ruling was swift and comprehensive. The injunction was dissolved, Sandra's patents were invalidated due to prior art, and Liu Industries faced investigation for fraudulent patent claims. More importantly, Lucky was granted broad protection for his innovations and the right to continue community-based deployment of Phoenix vehicles. As they left the courthouse, Lucky and Helena found themselves surrounded by celebrating supporters and grateful Phoenix vehicle recipients. Mrs. Rodriguez hugged Lucky with tears in her eyes, while other families shared stories of how the vehicles had served their communities during the typhoon. "You did it, Kuya," Maria said, joining the celebration. "You proved that innovation belongs to the people who need it most." Lucky looked at the crowd of families, engineers, and community advocates who had supported Project Phoenix through its greatest crisis. The viral social media campaign that had started with Mrs. Rodriguez's rescue operations had evolved into a movement that proved technology could serve communities rather than just corporations. Helena stood beside him, feeling the satisfaction of a partnership that had survived corporate sabotage, legal threats, and natural disasters to prove that authentic innovation could triumph over established interests. The tire iron that had started their relationship had become the foundation for a new approach to engineering that prioritized community needs over corporate profits. 6 months after Typhoon Paulo, Lucky stood in the courtyard of the University of the Philippines, wearing a cap and gown that felt both familiar and strange. The graduation ceremony represented more than completing his degree. It marked the transformation of a street mechanic into a recognized innovator whose work had changed how the world thought about community-based engineering. Helena sat in the audience with Lucky's siblings, watching as he received not just his delayed bachelor's degree, but also an honorary doctorate for his contributions to sustainable transportation technology. The university had created a new scholarship program in his parents' names, funding engineering education for students from flood-prone communities. Dr. Luis Valdez, Maria whispered with pride as Lucky crossed the stage. It has a nice ring to it. The ceremony was followed by a reception at Lucky's original shop, which had been transformed into the headquarters of the Phoenix Research Institute. The tarp-covered workspace had evolved into a proper facility, but Lucky had insisted on keeping his original tools, including the tire iron that had started everything. Mrs. Rodriguez arrived at the reception driving her Phoenix vehicle, which now displayed small modification badges showing the improvements she had suggested based on real-world usage. Her vehicle had become the template for the second-generation Phoenix design, incorporating lessons learned from 6 months of community deployment. "Dr. Lucky," she said with a grin, "my grandchildren want to study engineering now. They say if their neighbor can become a professor, maybe they can too." Lucky felt the weight of the example he had become, understanding that his story represented possibility for other young people from communities that corporate innovation usually ignored. Tell them that engineering isn't about having the fanciest tools, it's about understanding problems so well that you can solve them with whatever you have. Helena approached with 2 cups of coffee and a satisfied expression. "The European Union just approved our bid for the Continental Climate Adaptation Program. 3,000 Phoenix vehicles for flood-prone communities across 12 countries. Lucky accepted the coffee, thinking about the scale of what Project Phoenix had become. The viral success of their Typhoon response had created global demand for community-focused engineering solutions, and Cortez Technologies had evolved into a hybrid corporation that prioritized social impact alongside financial returns. "Any word from Marcus and Sandra?" Lucky asked. Marcus pled guilty to corporate espionage charges. Sandra's family company lost their automotive certification and folded last month. Helena's voice carried satisfaction but not vindictiveness. "Justice, but not the kind that destroys lives, just the kind that prevents them from harming others." The reception was interrupted by Miguel, now 10 years old, and serving as unofficial host for the celebration. "Kuya Lucky, the news people want to interview you about the new engineering program." Lucky had announced the launch of the Community Innovation Academy earlier that week, a program that would train engineers from flood-prone communities to develop climate-adaptive solutions using locally available materials. The academy represented his vision of scaling innovation through education rather than corporate expansion. "The goal isn't to create more companies like Cortez Technologies," Lucky explained to the reporter. "The goal is to create more engineers who understand the problems their communities face and have the tools to solve them." Helena watched the interview with admiration for how Lucky had grown into his role as a public advocate for community-based innovation. He spoke with the same quiet confidence he had shown when rebuilding her Ferrari, but now his audience included policymakers, corporate leaders, and young engineers around the world. As evening approached and the reception crowd began to thin, Lucky and Helena found themselves alone in the workshop section of the institute. The space still smelled of motor oil and metal, but now it also contained advanced testing equipment and prototyping tools that enabled rapid development of new innovations. "Any regrets?" Helena asked, settling onto the same overturned crate where she had first proposed their partnership. Lucky considered the question, thinking about the path that had led from desperate rescue to global recognition. "I regret that my parents didn't live to see this. They would have been proud that their deaths led to something that helps other families." "They would have been proud of you regardless," Helena replied. "But I think they would have especially loved seeing their son become someone who uses success to lift up others." Lucky pulled out his wallet and showed Helena the family photograph he still carried. The image was even more faded now, but the faces of his parents remained clear. "I used to look at this picture and feel guilty about surviving when they didn't." Now I look at it and feel grateful that I was given the chance to continue their work. Helena understood the transformation Lucky had undergone, from someone haunted by survivor's guilt to someone empowered by survivor's responsibility. What's next for the people's engineer? Lucky smiled at the title that had stuck despite his initial resistance. Next, we prove that this approach can work for other challenges: housing, water purification, renewable energy. Communities have solutions to their own problems. They just need engineers who listen instead of lecturing. As they prepared to lock up the institute for the night, Lucky performed a final check of the workshop tools, ensuring everything was clean and properly stored for tomorrow's work. The tire iron hung in its place of honor, polished and ready for whatever challenges might require its simple, reliable assistance. Helena watched Lucky's methodical approach to tool maintenance, recognizing the same careful attention to detail that had made their partnership successful. "You know what I've learned from working with you?" "What's that?" "That the most revolutionary innovations often come disguised as simple improvements to everyday problems. You didn't set out to change the automotive industry. You just wanted to build a car that wouldn't leave families stranded during floods." Lucky nodded, thinking about the unintended consequences of trying to solve one clear problem with available resources. Maybe that's the secret: focus on solving real problems for real people, and the innovation takes care of itself. As they walked through the neighborhood toward Lucky's new apartment, larger now, but still in the same community where he had grown up, Helena reflected on how much both their lives had changed since that night in the flooded street. Lucky had become a globally recognized engineer and educator, while she had transformed Cortez Technologies into a company that measured success by community impact as well as financial returns. "The tire iron is still my favorite innovation," Helena said as they reached her car. "Not because it's technically sophisticated, but because it represents the moment when someone chose to help a stranger without calculating the consequences." Lucky looked back at the Institute building, where security lights illuminated the sign reading, "Phoenix Research Institute. Community Innovation for Global Challenges." Tomorrow would bring new problems to solve, new communities to serve, and new engineers to train in the philosophy that innovation should serve those who need it most. The damaged family photograph in Lucky's wallet had become a symbol not of loss, but of legacy, proof that even the most devastating failures could become the foundation for extraordinary success when guided by the determination to ensure that others didn't suffer the same fate. The street mechanic who had risked everything to save a drowning stranger had become a voice for community-based innovation that would echo through generations of engineers who understood that true success was measured not in corporate profits, but in lives improved and communities empowered. As Helena drove away and Lucky climbed the stairs to his apartment, both carried with them the knowledge that they had proven something profound about the nature of innovation, partnership, and the courage required to bet everything on the belief that extraordinary solutions often emerge from the most ordinary acts of human decency. The tire iron that had saved Helena's life had become the catalyst for a revolution that proved salvation doesn't arrive in corporate boardrooms. It comes from the hands of those willing to get dirty for the sake of strangers.